In March 1945, the Western Front still burned, though Germany was collapsing. Beyond the broken Siegfried Line, one armored column of the United States Army began to move. 80 tanks and supply trucks advanced into ground the maps marked Suicide Road. Their order was impossible: drive 80 miles through enemy lines and reach the Rhine without a single halt. No air cover, no pause. Each mile was measured like factory output. Engines ran at 3,000 revolutions per minute for 30 hours straight. Fuel crews poured gasoline under smoke while artillery searched for their range. Villages flickered past, walls cracked, bridges cratered, fields burning with tracer fire. The column did not break formation. German observers reported a moving wall of steel, yet no tank dropped out, no engine failed. The line stayed unbroken, crawling through fog and flame until the dawn light struck the river. When the sun rose over the Rhine, the lead Sherman still carried its full crew, treads white with frost and mud. Behind it, 79 engines idled in perfect rhythm. By the end of that day, the unthinkable had already happened. They had crossed 80 miles of German fire, and not one tank was lost. By early 1945, the German front in the west was fractured but still armed. The Ardennes counteroffensive had failed, yet hundreds of batteries remained hidden behind rivers and hedgerows. Every mile east of Aachen held wreckage, wire, and guns that fired until their barrels split. The Wehrmacht no longer fought for victory. It fought for time. Each hour delayed meant another bridge laid across the Rhine. For the advancing American armor, distance had become the new enemy. Tanks could surge forward, but fuel trucks could not. Each halt risked turning momentum into vulnerability. Doctrine said, move 10 miles, refuel, consolidate, then resume. It was safe. It was predictable. The enemy had learned to time it. One regimental commander, a veteran from North Africa, saw the flaw. Speed had replaced firepower as the decisive weapon. He studied the narrow corridor between the Hurtgen forest and the Erft River: mud, craters, collapsed bridges. German maps labeled it impassable to armor. He decided to drive straight through. His plan ignored the rules. The column would carry its own maintenance, fuel, and recovery units inside the line, moving as one continuous mechanism. Engineers would travel between tanks, not behind them. Each platoon would refuel in motion, every mile logged to a stopwatch. The target was the Rhine, 80 miles east in 30 hours. Officers called it reckless. Quartermasters warned that a single delay would strand the regiment. The commander's answer was written in numbers, not orders. 3 miles per hour, 20-minute refuel cycle, 0 stops. The convoy was renamed in shorthand, Suicide Column. On the eve of departure, mechanics tightened bolts under blackout lamps. Drivers traced landmarks by touch, memorizing broken walls and road forks. Gunners checked their sights against dim stars. The air smelled of gasoline, oil, and cold soil. No speeches were made. The men already knew the odds. Just before dawn, fog rolled through the fields. Engines coughed, then steadied into rhythm. From a distance, the formation looked like a single metallic vein pulsing across the landscape. The commander climbed onto his tank, headset pressed to his ear, eyes fixed east. At 0400 hours, the signal flare rose. The first Sherman lurched forward, its tracks biting frozen mud. Behind it, 79 engines joined, synchronized through vibration alone. Villages ahead still slept under blackout. German sentries heard the rumble, but thought it distant thunder. Within minutes, the column crossed the start line and vanished into smoke. They believed they were driving towards certain death. He believed death could be outrun by precision. Preparation began 3 days before departure. On a mud-stained map table, the commander traced a corridor less than 8 miles wide between Hurtgen Forest and the Erft River. The route cut through mined villages and waterlogged fields that even tractors avoided. To most officers, it looked like a dead end. To him, it was the one path the enemy would not defend heavily, because no one sane would drive armor through it. He reorganized the regiment into a single mechanical chain. Each tank company paired with its own engineers, medics, and fuel trucks. Between every dozen Shermans came a recovery vehicle stacked with spare road wheels, track pins, and lubricants. The order of march was fixed: command units first, medium tanks next, then lights, engineers, and supply. The tail carried bridging trucks and field welders. Nothing moved alone. Every machine covered the one ahead. Each Sherman held 175 gallons of gasoline, enough for 75 miles. The Rhine lay 80 ahead. To close that gap, the convoy would refuel 3 times while moving. Regulations forbade it, but rules meant delay. Hoses would connect between vehicles at walking speed. Clamps would lock under vibration. The method risked fire with every transfer, yet halting meant destruction. Maintenance routines were rewritten. If a tank threw a track, another took its place while the crew repaired under smoke. If an engine overheated, it was towed until restarted. Only a destroyed road justified a full stop. Engineers rehearsed bridging with prefabricated girders until their record time fell below 20 minutes. By night, they wired flood lamps to jeeps, powering welders and radios from the same generator. The column would move like a conveyor, each part self-contained and self-repairing. Weather forecasts warned of cold rain. Mud would double rolling resistance, fuel consumption rising from 1 gallon per half mile to 1 per quarter. The commander ordered an extra 12000 gallons loaded onto trailers, bringing convoy mass to more than 800 tons. He demanded an average of 12 miles per hour, double the safe rate for that weight. Communications shrank to 3 code phrases: Steel 1 for refuel, Red Road for bridge, White Dawn when terrain opened. Every additional word risked interception. Rehearsals took place on a 10-mile test loop near Aachen. Crews practiced leapfrog refueling, replacing hoses under motion, repairing tracks with stopwatches running. By the final drill, the column maintained speed for 30 straight hours. Downtime averaged 7 minutes per failure. Nothing else in the theater moved that efficiently. At the depot, mechanics modified the engines. Factory tests had shown Shermans overheating at 460 degrees Fahrenheit after 10 hours of full load. Field crews fitted scavenged oil sprayers and makeshift ducts, cutting heat by 40 degrees. Records noted, temperature stabilized at 420 after 12 hours, within tolerance. It was crude engineering, but it saved lives. Headquarters suggested splitting the convoy into 2 groups for safety. The commander refused. Division meant delay. A single column, he argued, was an artery, self-sealing when damaged. Fragmentation would bleed pressure. He inspected every platoon before dusk. Most of his crews were veterans from Normandy, their uniforms stained with earlier campaigns. They worked in silence, tightening bolts, checking traverse gears, and greasing turret rings. Orders were minimal. Each man knew his sequence by count, not by words. Scouts marked the route with chalk and faint phosphor dots on trees and wrecks. From the air, it resembled a white thread through ash-gray land. Photographs showed bridges blown, lanes cratered, and villages half submerged. Analysts estimated 0 chance of completing the run without mechanical losses. At the forward maintenance yard, generators droned all night. Sparks flashed where welders joined armor patches. Fuel drums were stacked 3 high, labeled by mileage range. When morning came, the convoy stretched 7 miles along the ridge, 80 combat vehicles, 20 service trucks, and 2 bulldozers for debris. Seen from above, it looked less like an army than a factory line set in motion. At 2200 hours, the commander walked the column one last time. He paused by each company, reading gauges and listening for uneven idle. Every engine tested at 2,800 revolutions per minute without sputter. Dim convoy lamps glowed red through mist, tracing the route like embers in wire. The men waited with engines ticking low, exhaust curling white against hedgerows. No radio chatter, only vibration. The fog held the sound close, turning 80 machines into one heartbeat. Beyond the ridge, German observers still believed the sector quiet. At 0400 hours, the signal flare lifted into the mist. The first Sherman lurched forward, tracks biting frozen clay. One by one, 79 followed, each keeping the exact spacing drilled in Aachen. The recovery trucks rolled last, their welders glowing faint blue. For the first minute the line crawled, then found rhythm. Engines synchronized until the noise merged into a single mechanical hum that neither rose nor fell. The convoy lights blurred into a continuous band stretching east toward the unseen river. The suicide column was no longer a rumor. It was an equation written in steel, and it had just begun to solve itself. At 0400 hours, the column crossed its start line. Frost glistened on the verges, and fog drifted from ditches still warm with shell smoke. The lead Sherman climbed the first rise at full throttle and did not slow. Behind it, the red convoy lights stretched into one continuous thread that pulsed through the mist. The order was simple: no halts, no gaps, no deviation. Average speed, 12 miles per hour under intermittent artillery. Fuel burn, 1 gallon per half-mile advanced. At mile 7, the first contact came from a ridge farm on the left. Tracers swept the fog, sparks ricocheted across glacis plates, and the sound of German machine guns echoed between barns. The column did not return fire immediately. The gunners tracked the ridge while still moving, firing 3 short bursts that flattened the hedge line and silenced the position. Smoke drifted sideways, and the tanks never slowed. By mile 12, the road narrowed into a lane between flooded fields. Frozen mud splashed against fenders. A collapsed culvert forced engineers forward with steel planks. They bridged the gap in seconds, engines idling, gears engaged. The tanks rolled across, shaking frost from the trees. Engine temperature recorded at 420 degrees Fahrenheit. Oil pressure steady at 60 pounds per square inch. In the next village, broken walls leaned over the road. Doors swung loose, and the smell of smoke mixed with diesel. A burned German truck blocked the square. Instead of detouring, a recovery vehicle hooked the wreck and dragged it aside under covering fire. Civilians peered from cellars as the Shermans rolled through, treads grinding on cobblestones. Regimental log noted 4 contact reports in 20 minutes. Casualties? None. At mile 15, the first refuel began in motion. Hoses uncoiled from trucks to tanks while both moved at walking pace. Gasoline splashed over gauntlets and froze instantly on steel. A mortar barrage landed short, showering the road with mud. The clamps came free, the caps spun shut, and the column accelerated again. 2 tanks with shrapnel dents were welded on the move, sparks trailing into the fog. Refuel rate averaged 40 gallons per minute per truck. Downtime per tank, 3 minutes. A telephone line sagged across the road. The lead tank caught it with its bow and snapped it. A second line lay buried in the ditch, cut by a sapper running beside the tracks. A half-track appeared ahead, engine grinding, gun turning. The second platoon fired 2 rounds without slowing. The half-track burned in place, its ammunition cooking off as the line passed. By late morning, the first river branch appeared. The bridge at its end was cratered, 1 span gone. Engineers leapt from trucks carrying girders. A section leader counted 5 minutes. Boards slammed into place. Tanks rolled across the patched surface before the echo of hammer blows died away. Bridge repair timed at 6 minutes, 8 seconds. Load test, 25 tons. Beyond the crossing, the land rose toward low orchards. A German gun opened fire from cover behind a stone wall. The lead Sherman fired 1 round on the move, blowing the gun into splinters. The column's rhythm never broke. It was movement used as armor. At noon, they were 4 minutes ahead of schedule. The commander ordered a maintenance truck forward. 2 thrown tracks were replaced in under 10 minutes. The road widened slightly, and the speed increased. Scouts in a Stuart light tank advanced ahead, reporting a barricade of carts blocking the next bend. Engineers prepared explosives, but a Sherman fitted with a dozer blade shoved through, splintering wood and iron. Transmission temperature stabilized at 210 degrees Fahrenheit. Track tension adjusted at 10-mile intervals. A flight of German fighters appeared at 1400 hours, skimming low through the haze. The tanks closed to hedges, their olive paint nearly blending with frost. The planes strafed once, hitting only mud. Tracers rose from half-tracks at the rear, forcing the aircraft to climb. No hits were recorded. The convoy held its line. In the next town, church bells clanged loose from concussion. Rubble covered the road. Gunners fired short to keep the walls from collapsing onto the convoy. The tanks passed within feet of doorways, engines echoing down narrow alleys. Crews repaired track pins, mid-roll, bolts tightening under smoke. The work had become instinct, every movement part of one system. At mile 30, the second refuel began under heavy shelling. German guns bracketed the fields. Gasoline hissed into tanks while earth burst around them. One spill ignited briefly. A crewman smothered it with wet dirt, then reattached the line. 9 minutes later, the convoy lights blinked twice, refuel complete. Fuel reserves restored to 70% across formation. No vehicles disabled. The road bent along a canal bordered by frozen reeds. A gun fired from across the water. The first shell shrieked past the lead Sherman, striking a house. 3 tanks fired together, their rounds flattening the barn that hid the gun. The canal filled with dust. The formation advanced through the haze, every engine note synchronized. A mile further, a Panther tank rolled from behind a stone barn. Its cannon swung toward the road. The lead Sherman released smoke, diving left into a field. The next platoon fired 3 shots on the move. The second struck the Panther's drive sprocket, stopping it cold. The third penetrated the side plate. Flames spread, and the convoy passed without pause. Gun stabilization maintained accuracy at 18 miles per hour, hit probability estimated at 70%. The ridge ahead shimmered with frost. A broken truck blocked the crown. A recovery vehicle raced forward, wrapped a chain, and dragged it aside. The road opened again. Beyond it, the map showed a rail line, the first of 2 before the Rhine. The column reached it at 1600 hours. Rails cratered by explosives. Repair crew bridged gaps in 9 minutes using timber cribbing. Mortars fell as the last tank crossed, metal ringing like struck anvils. Fragments peppered one Sherman's turret but caused no damage. Mechanics marked the holes with chalk for later welding. By evening, the sleet thickened. Drivers squinted through slits iced over, wiping glass with rags tied to sticks. Periscopes fogged, grease stiffened, hands went numb. The convoy lights burned steady, red through snow. The engines hummed as one pulse of power in the white dusk. At mile 38, a fork appeared. The shorter road ran straight through a village under artillery range. The longer curved around through drainage fields. The commander pointed to the left, the safer route. 10 minutes later, German shells tore apart the road they had not taken. The column never slowed. By twilight, the convoy lights looked like embers floating through sleet. The schedule still held. The Rhine lay 40 miles ahead, invisible beyond the mist. The pattern held. The math stayed. The water tower rose through sleet like a monument to cold endurance. Beneath it, the convoy lights curved and climbed, tracks grinding frost into gray mud. The lead jeep crossed first, its radio hissing, followed by the advance platoon of Shermans. Beyond the ridge lay the second rail line and the hamlet that marked the final third of the run. The commander raised one gloved hand. Engineers forward, guns low, intervals tight. A green flare burst above the roofs, warning of defenders ahead. The first tank swung right, cutting into a tractor path, its gun coaxing bursts down the main street. Doors shattered from concussion. A timber cart blocked the next turn. The bulldozer tank roared up, blade down, pushing wood and splinters aside. The column thickened, filled the road again, and advanced through the smoke. A German field gun fired from the ditch line. The first shell struck a wall, spraying dust across the convoy. 2 Shermans replied without halting, shells exploding against the hedge bank. Smoke filled the air, and silence followed. Engine revolution steady at 2,600 per minute. Fuel reserve averaged 55%. The road sank into low ground where frost melted into black slurry. A culvert ahead sagged under the weight of thaw. The commander signaled "Red Road." Engineers dropped logs, braced the flanks, and waved the line forward one by one. When the last tank crossed, the structure caved behind it, swallowed by the ditch. The column never looked back. Visibility dropped until the lights of one vehicle blurred into the next. Drivers wiped periscopes with rags on poles, breath frosting on glass. Inside the turrets, the air smelled of oil and sweat. They were halfway to the Rhine, their schedule exact to the minute. Average interval tightened to 2 hull lengths. Periscope clearing every 6 minutes by rotation. A gun shield glinted behind poplars ahead. The 4th tank fired smoke and veered left, while engineers sprinted under cover carrying satchel charges. They reached the trench, vanished in the blast, and reappeared streaked with mud. When the smoke lifted, the gun was gone. Beyond the poplars, the land opened to empty flats. A lone locomotive hissed on the horizon, brakes glowing red. The column angled along the railway, passing wrecked freight cars and scattered grain. A Sherman's track crushed a rail cart, scattering grain across the ditch. No one slowed. Track shoe wear measured at 12%. Spare links issued from engineer truck number 3. Mid-afternoon brought the first real counterstroke. 2 German assault guns crawled from a woodlot and fired blind into fog. The lead Sherman swung down a drainage ditch, its gun steady on the move. 2 rounds struck short. The 3rd found the near casemate and split the armor open. Artillery joined in, shells falling laddered across the road. The commander cut through a farmyard, splintering fences, using barns as cover. Chickens scattered in dust. The column rejoined the road beyond the trees. Deviation from planned route, 1 mile. Time loss, under 5 minutes. The next roadblock came at a rail embankment where steel beams lay across cobblestones. Explosives would take too long. The bulldozer tank advanced, blade down, rails shrieking against armor until they broke apart. Sparks fell into puddles. The column crossed through the gap, tracks chewing steel into silence. Frost hardened into hail. Sleet became white grit that rang on hulls. The convoy lights became the only horizon, red dots through gray air. Inside each tank, men sucked hard candy to keep alert, hands locked on levers numbed by cold. A loader marked remaining shells on the turret wall with a grease pencil. 22 high explosive, 9 armor piercing. Engine heat held at 430 degrees Fahrenheit. Battery exchange cycle every 2 hours per platoon. Ahead, the river fork widened into a flooded plain. The bridge there was half destroyed, one span torn. Engineers swung prefabricated girders from trailers. Hammers clanged. Planks slid, nails hammered barehanded despite ice. The first Sherman rolled across, boards flexing but holding. 11 minutes later, the column was over. Bridge rated to 25 tons by field tables. Crossing completed under scattered shell fire. Dusk came under a ceiling of low cloud. The route narrowed between a mill and the river bank. The commander chose the towpath under the wheel rather than risk the main street. One by one, tanks crept along the stone edge, water lapping inches below. Their convoy lights flickered off the water like veins of molten steel. Above them, the mill stood black and silent. Beyond the town, the ground lifted again. Flares bloomed white over the ridge, machine gun fire cutting arcs through the sleet. 3 Shermans fired in rhythm, short arcs, low elevation, shells plowing through brush. The ridge fell silent, except for the hiss of rain. Then came the smell of river water, heavy and cold. Engine temperatures held stable. Speed recovered to 12 miles per hour. Distance since start line, 72 miles. The last obstacle stood at the final bridge, its approach blocked by carts, logs, and a gun hidden inside a barn. The German shell struck first, chipping stone and sending fragments across the lead tank. Smoke filled the lane. The bulldozer Sherman drove straight through the barricade, its blade smashing timber and wagons aside. 2 tanks fired at the barn. The gun vanished in a flash. The convoy rolled onto the bridge, planks rattling, parapets scraping armor. Beneath them, the Rhine flowed black under sleet. On the far bank, engineers waved from the slope, their silhouettes pale in the fog. Fuel remaining, 40% average. Odometer total, 80 miles. When the last vehicle cleared the bridge, the engines throttled down. Mechanics dismounted, knocking ice from track pins, checking vents for cracks. Exhaust drifted over the water like fog returning to the river. The men spoke little. They counted hulls one by one until the final number matched the morning's roll. Maintenance record: 3 leaks, 2 cracked rollers, 0 recoveries. Total operational readiness: 100%. At dawn, the sleet eased into rain. Across the water, burned barges lay stranded in shallows. Staff cars arrived from the rear, their fenders caked with mud. An officer climbed out, stared at the line of tanks stretching along the bank, and said nothing. The commander saluted once, handed him the log sheet, and closed the folder. The figures were exact. The column had reached the Rhine intact. No cheers, no banners, no speeches, only the sound of engines cooling under rain. They had crossed 80 miles of fire and mathematics, and every machine still ran. The mission ended where the river began, its outcome written in fuel, speed, and endurance. They had turned movement into armor, and they had survived by never stopping. By the morning of the 7th of March, 1945, the column stood on the western bank of the Rhine. The air was damp with cordite and rain. Tanks idled in shallow revetments, exhaust curling upward like fog. Behind them, the road they had crossed was still burning, bridges shattered, craters filled with black water, villages reduced to ash. The march had ended, but the men had not slept in 2 days. Every face was pale beneath oil and soot. Their voices rasped from engine fumes and cold air drawn through masks. The silence did not last. At 0900 hours, German guns opened from the far bank. The first rounds landed wide. The second bracketed the ridge where the Shermans waited. Splinters clattered off turrets like gravel. The commander gave a single word: scatter. Each platoon moved in sequence, engines rising in staggered rhythm. They did not retreat. They rearranged just as the plan required. Enemy fire rate: 12 shells per minute during first 10 minutes. Damage recorded: 1 cracked periscope, 1 sheared antenna. When the barrage lifted, the horizon flashed again, this time with tracer. Infantry appeared on ferries and small rafts, crossing under smoke from oil drums. Machine gun fire from the ridge swept the shore, tearing through the rafts before they touched ground. Gunners fired by stopwatch, switching barrels every 90 seconds. Within minutes, the river boiled with shattered planks. None reached the bank. At 10:20 hours, scouts reported armor gathering 12 miles northeast, 20 panzers with supporting guns. The commander's reply was the same as always: keep moving. He ordered a lateral shift south, maintaining contact only by convoy lights. Through fog and sleet, the regiment slid down the ridge, 2 columns side by side, rolling as one slow current of steel. Average speed during redeployment: 8 miles per hour. Communication interval: visual check every 5 minutes. At noon, muzzle flashes appeared through smoke at 500 yards. The first Panther fired high, its round glancing from a Sherman's mantlet and burying in mud. The struck tank did not stop. Its gun fired twice on the move, the second shell punching into the Panther's flank. The explosion flattened a hedge and sent dust across the road. 3 more German vehicles fired from concealment. 2 were hit by return fire within a minute. Recorded hit probability: 70% confirmed by inspection. Enemy armor destroyed: 4 vehicles. The field dissolved into smoke and rain. The column fought as a process, not a line, each tank advancing in timed increments, each gun covering the next. Mechanics crawled under hulls even as shells fell. Engines ran hot enough to dry mud in seconds. The sound was not battle, but machinery operating under pressure. Engine temperature range: 410 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Oil pressure tolerance plus or minus 10%. By mid-afternoon, the German formation had disintegrated. Tanks burned across the fields, their silhouettes faint in the mist. The American column reformed at the ridge, refueled, and began inspection. Crews drank from canteens filled with melted frost. Their movements were automatic: check treads, count shells, tighten bolts. No one spoke of victory. The only question was distance to the next bridge. Fuel restored to 90% average within 30 minutes. Ammunition topped to 34 rounds per tank. At 1600 hours, enemy artillery resumed, this time from east of the river. The commander ordered a rolling displacement, each platoon moving 50 yards, firing 2 rounds, then reversing. The pattern broke the enemy's aim. Shells landed where the tanks had been, not where they were. The ridge shook, but no hits landed direct. Artillery expenditure, 180 rounds expended by regiment in 2 hours. German counterfire ceased at 1740. Twilight came with cold rain. Smoke drifted low, tinted orange by burning farms along the horizon. Mechanics reported all power plants functional after 40 hours of continuous load. Filters darkened, oil thickened, yet pressure held. Crews wiped condensation from periscopes, replaced cracked vision blocks, and logged every reading with precision of factory inspectors. Serviceability, 100% across 80 hulls. Recovery vehicles, 0 deployed. Corps Command transmitted new orders at 1900 hours. Hold position for crossing operations. The regiment that had begun as a suicide column would now lead the advance over the Rhine. Engineers arrived to mark pontoon anchor points. Sparks from their torches danced against tank hulls as night fell. The men rested inside their vehicles, wrapped in blankets that smelled of gasoline and cordite. Some slept with helmets on, others listened to the slow ticking of cooling metal. One gunner traced condensation on the turret wall and wrote 80 miles, 0 loss. Another erased it before dawn. At midnight, the commander walked the line. Frost crackled beneath his boots. Every tank he passed was warm to the touch, engines still radiating life. Far across the river, flashes of distant fire reflected on low clouds. He paused by his command tank, wiped a layer of soot from the glasses, and looked east. Somewhere beyond that fog, the war was already ending, though no one yet believed it. By 2 in the morning, the Rhine ran black and silent. Fuel drums stood stacked in rows, ready for the next run. The men knew what the report would say before it was written. Operational summary: 80 tanks advanced 80 miles, 0 destroyed, 0 captured. Time of movement, 30 hours. Mechanical readiness, 100%. The numbers sounded unreal, but each was verified 3 times. The operation had replaced fear with measurement, chaos with scheduling. What began as a reckless dash through mined fields had become a demonstration of industrial precision under fire. When daylight came, the engines started again. The line of tanks rolled toward the riverbank, tracks clinking over frozen earth. No cheers, no signal music, only the steady sound of motion resuming. They had proven that discipline could defeat exhaustion, that mathematics could outrun destruction. The war would remember them not for heroics, but for continuity. They reached the Rhine as they had left the forest, unbroken, synchronized, and complete. Not one was missing, not one was lost. By late March 1945, the column ceased to exist as a regiment. Its tanks were redistributed among bridgehead divisions, their markings repainted, their crews reassigned without ceremony. Yet the record of their 80-mile run, no halts, no losses, survived as a quiet anomaly in the armored logs. The original operations file, labeled Spearhead Column, was only 6 pages long, typed in single spacing, its tone clinical. There were no adjectives, only numbers. The United States Army Ordnance Department compiled the after-action data. Total distance, 80 miles. Duration, 30 hours. Average convoy speed, 12 miles per hour. Fuel consumption, 80,000 gallons. Mechanical failures, 0. Combat losses, 0. Maintenance downtime, 8 minutes per vehicle. Ammunition expenditure, 180 rounds. To the staff analysts, it resembled a production chart rather than a battle report. The commander's closing line read simply, "Mission fulfilled within tolerance." At Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers replicated segments of the operation using test tracks built from captured German concrete slabs. They ran radial engines under sustained load until failure. Laboratory logs showed breakdown at 36 hours. The wartime crews had exceeded that by 4. The tests confirmed what the field march had already proven. Precision, not armor thickness, had ensured survival. In 1946, the Army's Tactical School in Fort Knox issued a doctrine supplement titled Continuous Motion Logistics. It credited an unnamed regiment operating near Cologne for demonstrating that refueling, repair, and combat could merge into one uninterrupted process. The phrase rolling maintenance entered official vocabulary, marking a shift from attrition to endurance. Later in Korea and Vietnam, the same principle would govern mechanized convoys crossing hostile terrain. The blueprint had been written beside the Rhine. German archives, seized after the war, contained fragments of intercepted messages describing the event. One officer near Euskirchen wrote, "The enemy moves without pause. We shell the roads, but they are already past." Another report dismissed it as an exaggeration until photographs confirmed the line of tanks reaching the Rhine intact. For the defenders, it was not a battle lost, but a calculation misunderstood. Most of the column's Shermans were scrapped or reassigned to occupation duty. A handful survive in depots and memorial lots across Europe, their serials faint beneath layers of paint. One, preserved near Koblenz, still bears a weld scar across the right fender, a field repair from that night march. Inside its turret, a grease pencil mark remains under chipped paint. No halt. The commander returned to the United States in late 1945. His personnel file notes a promotion, then a transfer to logistics planning. No medals, no speeches, no interviews. When asked years later about the column, he replied, "It was not courage, it was control." In 1946, a declassified summary entered the historical record under a new title, Operation Spearhead Column, Case Study in Armored Continuity. Its final sentence captured the essence of an age that had turned warfare into arithmetic. Speed is protection. Precision is survival. The world remembered the Rhine crossings for their scale, but not for this silent regiment that had proven distance could be defeated by timing. Their march turned fear into formula, improvisation into industry, and exhaustion into motion. The equation held. 80 tanks, 80 miles, 0 loss. The column disappeared into history, but its numbers endured. Movement had replaced armor. Endurance had replaced chance. And on the cold banks of the Rhine, mathematics had replaced fear. Years later, the road once called Suicide Route became a quiet provincial highway. Fields covered the craters, and new houses stood where command tanks had refueled under fire. Farmers still turned up track links in spring plowing, small rusted pieces stamped with factory codes from Ohio and Michigan. The war had long ended, but the metal remembered. No monument marks the path. Only a bent milestone remains, half buried in grass, its faded inscription still visible. 80 miles. Local children climb on it without knowing what it measured. The operations report rests in an archive file labeled Completed Without Loss. Historians who read it often pause at the tone, dry, impersonal, entirely numerical. Yet that was how the war closed, not with speeches, but with totals. One surviving Sherman sits in a storage yard near Koblenz, paint peeled to bare steel. Its engine is silent, its hull unscarred. On the side plate, under dust, a single stencil is still legible. It reads, "No halt." That phrase had once been an order. It became the story itself. They did not outrun death. They measured it and crossed through within the margin allowed by time.